Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Hong Kong Situation Investigation. I'm your host, Winnie Tang. In response to the request from International Christian School Student Council, today we are going to look into factors that we need to consider when buying a car. As high school students go into university, there are different choices that they have to make, and one of them is to buy a car. So what do we have to consider when we buy a car? Today we are honored to have HSBC's Chief Executive Officer, Alexander Flockhart, and Hong Kong Monetary Authority's Chief Executive, Norman Chan, to come and talk about this issue with us. First, let's welcome Mr. Flockhart. Hi, welcome. Please take a seat. Thank you. So, I know that in economy, incentives is the main factor on people's decisions.
Yes, right.
So, in this case of buying a car, how do incentives affect people's choices?
A lot of times when people are buying cars, they do not have all the cash they need in hand. So what they would do is borrow car loans from banks. There's always an interest rate that borrowers will have to pay for car loans. The lower the interest rate, the better the deal is for the borrower. Interest rate is affected by the scarcity of loanable funds, meaning the economy is doing good, people generally have less desire to save. The quality of loanable funds will then decrease, making interest rates higher. On the contrary, when the economy is weak, people will feel like there is a need to save. The quantity of loanable funds will then increase, making interest rates lower. And tying this back to incentives, the lower the interest rate, the greater the incentive will be for people to borrow money and buy cars, because the overall purchasing cost is lower.
Then according to interest rate, is now a good time to buy a car?
Yes, it is. Here's a graph showing the interest rate in Hong Kong from 1998 to now. As you can see, the interest rate has dropped lower than it has ever been since 1998, starting from 2009 to now. It had gone down from 7.8% in 1998 to only 0.5% now. One of the main factors that caused this drastic change is the financial tsunami that hit the world's economy in 2008. And if we compare the interest rate now to forecasted interest rates for the future, the interest rates will rise back up to 4.4% in 2015 as the economy slowly recovers. So now would be a good time to buy a car.
Oh, I see. Then how about car tax? We know that the car tax in Hong Kong has just recently rose by 1.5%. Does the amount of car tax give an incentive to people as well?
Yes, definitely. It affects what time people will have a greater incentive to buy a car. Meaning when the government has just increased the car tax, people will have less incentive to buy a car. On the contrary, when the government have just decreased the car tax, people will have a greater incentive to buy a car.
So, since the Hong Kong government has just increased the car tax, then people would not feel like buying a car now, right?
Yes, most likely this would be the case.
Then how should they choose when the interest rate is giving out a positive incentive while the car tax is giving out an opposite one?
Well, usually once the government has just made some changes to the car tax, they wouldn't change it for a couple of years. For example, the last time the Hong Kong government increased the car tax was back in 2003. Then they did not change it until recently, not changing for 8 years. On the other hand, interest rate is much more volatile. So since the car tax had already been set higher and we cannot do anything about it, then why don't we buy a car now while the interest rate is so low, rather than to wait till the interest rates get higher later?
Oh, I see your point. So, another question. Is there any incentive that would change people's decision in buying a new car or a used car?
Yes, other than the price difference between the new car and the used car, interest rates that are charged for them are actually different. So it sends out incentives as well.
Really? Can you please tell us more about it?
Yes, sure. The interest rate charged for a new car loan is actually lower than that of a used car. This is because it is harder for lenders or banks to assess the absolute value of a used vehicle. Lenders have to use a combination of the vehicle's history and market standards to interpret its value. It is important that banks know the value of the car because then they can measure the risk of non-payment. Therefore, to make up for this ambiguity and uncertainty, banks charge a higher interest rate to people who are borrowing used car loans.
Oh, so when deciding between a new car and a used car, the interest rate is also something important to think about.
Yep, you're right.
Is there any other advice that you would like to give to our audience?
Well, when borrowing car loans, it is important that you have a good credit rating report or background. Lenders or banks tend to charge people with bad credit report a high interest rate in order to make up for the greater risk.
What you shared with us today has been very useful. Thank you for coming once again, Mr. Flockhart.
You're welcome.
After hearing from the head of HSBC, now let's gather more advice from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority's Chief Executive, Norman Tan. Welcome, Mr. Tan. Please take a seat. So, Mr. Tan, I know that the supply and demand is an important concept in the economy.
Yes, you're right.
Then, is there any way that the concept of supply and demand would change people's decision in buying a car?
Yes, definitely. As you all have heard from Mr. Flockhart earlier, interest rate is an important factor when buying a car, and what is controlling the interest rate is actually the supply and demand of money, or loanable funds. Here is how it works. When the economy is doing well, people generally have less desire to save. The supply of money and loanable funds will then decrease, making money more scarce, and so interest rate gets higher. On the contrary, when the economy is weak, people would like to feel that there's a need to save. The supply of money and loanable funds will then increase, making money less scarce, so interest rate gets lower. I know this is sort of a recap of what Mr. Flockhart said, but this point is important to remember.
So, according to what you said, the strength of the economy is a crucial factor that affects the supply of money, right?
Yes.
Then, what indicators can we look into when determining the strength of the economy?
There are a couple of indicators that are related. We can first look at the real GDP growth rate. Here is a graph showing Hong Kong GDP from 1990 to now. As you can see, the real GDP now is 1.5%. It's doing average as compared to the GDP in the past 20 years. The forecasted annual average real GDP growth rate over the period of 2012 to 2015 is 4%, meaning that the economy will be getting better in the coming years. Then we can take out this unemployment rate graph. The unemployment rate now is 4%. It is also an average compared to the past 20 years. Forecasts predicted that the unemployment rate will remain virtually the same for the next 4 years. Lastly, we can also look at the Consumer Confidence Index. Here is a graph showing the statistics in consumer confidence for the past year. It has also dropped slightly throughout the year, but is forecasted to keep improving for the coming 4 years.
So, what does the statistics and forecast tell us?
So the economy is extremely weak now. It is only doing average as it is still recovering from the financial tsunami. But since it was predicted that the economy will keep improving from now on, it will be better to borrow a car loan and buy car now instead of later. Because if the economy starts to do better, the supply of loanable funds would decrease, pushing the interest rate higher than it is now.
Wow! These statistics and predictions will surely be helpful to those who are considering about this issue. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
After hearing such useful advice from Mr. Flockhart and Mr. Tan, the conclusion that we can make is, now is a good time to borrow money from banks and buy a car. And when we are buying a car, what we are looking for are average or weaker economy, low interest rate, and low car tax. We should also be aware of choosing between new car loan and used car loan, and be sure to keep a good credit record in order to get the lower interest rate for your car loan. I hope that this episode will be useful to students at ICS and others who are having trouble with this issue. And if there are any particular issues that you would like us to discuss about in the coming episodes, just send an email to this address. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.